OpenAI and its financial backer Microsoft are being sued in the US courts, this time by a pair of non-fiction authors who say the two companies infringed the copyright in their works to train the artificial intelligence behind the popular chatbot ChatGPT. This lawsuit follows several others filed by writers ranging from Sarah Silverman to George R.R. Martin, as well as the New York Times newspaper. Jeannie Patterson is a director at the Centre for AI and Digital Ethics at the University of Melbourne. She says it's a complicated case.
Well, there's two questions here that still need to be answered by courts. And one is whether training generative AI, such as ChatGPT, on data scraped from the internet infringes copyright. And then there's a specific case of whether when information is reproduced by ChatGPT, almost identical to the original source, whether that goes beyond any possible exception to copyright protection. And I'd have to say, I think it depends on what the court has to say, but I also think there may be solutions available regardless of what the court says.
So ChatGPT is clearly scraping the internet to train its AI models. Let's say you were the lawyers for OpenAI and Microsoft. How would you argue the case in their favour?
Well, I'd be saying that scraping the internet and training my generative AI is not the same as copying material. It's just using it as a basis for something else. So there's no copying, infringing copyright. And secondly, I'd say that it's fair use. I'm using that material, but typically ChatGPT isn't reproducing the material. So I'd say it's a fair use of the original source material, but not an infringement of copyright. And those arguments are in fact at the heart of these cases.
So it looks like a genuinely uncertain outcome. It could go either way, but most cases do tend to settle before they go to trial. But let's say if this one doesn't, and the court finds in favour of, say, the New York Times or all those writers who've sued Microsoft and OpenAI, what would the wider ramifications be?
Well, I think there's three possible options whether the court decides against OpenAI or not. And the first of those options is that the court just says, you can't do it. You have to stop using generative AI models. I think that's unlikely. I think the parties would reach some sort of solution. And the second possibility is the court says, well, it's okay in certain situations, in which case there'll be a technical solution, I think, to the problem. One of the complaints of the New York Times is that a New York Times article was reproduced by ChatGPT almost in entirety, despite that article sitting behind a paywall. And it would be possible, I think, to basically control prompt engineering so that sort of thing can't happen. And then the next solution would be something along the lines we saw in Australia, where the media companies bargained with Facebook and Google for a tax, effectively, to be paid every time links were made to news media sites on those platforms. And you can see some sort of solution like that coming out in this case as well.
So, Jeannie, it's possible that OpenAI and Microsoft might be sued in more lawsuits since there's, a lot of copyrighted material out there on the internet. So what's a solution that protects innovation and the rights of copyright holders? And would it lie outside the legal sphere?
I think it lies outside the legal sphere because in the court, there's a winner and a loser, and that's probably not what we want here. I think we can't wind back the technology. What we need to do is make the technology fair and safe. And what that generally requires is both a combination of a technical solution and some sort of commercial or contractual solution. Now, it's up to the parties how they work it out. And interestingly, the New York Times was in discussions with OpenAI about some sort of licensing arrangement before it brought this court case. So in a sense, those negotiations must have been broken down. New York Times wants more. But what I'd want to see in any solution is that small players are protected. So artists, journalists who don't have the weight of the New York Times to bargain or litigate for a solution, but nonetheless we might think are morally entitled to a solution.
And Jeannie, if we're talking about solutions outside of the legal sphere, what do you make of getting AI to determine the outcome of this debacle?
Well, it's not such so far-fetched as one might think, because one of the complaints is that generative AI produces new material, but sometimes that generated material is similar to existing works, the works of artists or writers. Now, one solution is that we use AI to assess the similarity between the generated work and the existing work, and if a certain similarity threshold is reached, that's when the license fee is paid. And that's work that's being done now by a colleague of mine, Professor Neva Elkin-Corrin, and I think it's a really interesting and practical solution to this dilemma.